Exhibit B would like to acknowledge the fact that we are on stolen land, the result of acts of genocide perpetrated by white settlers in the United States of America against this land's indigenous inhabitants. We recognize the complexity of us, a non-native collective, in doing so, but do so with it as an act of solidarity. Chicago is the traditional homeland of the Counts of the Three Fires, the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes like the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox also called this area home. Located at the intersection of several great waterways, the land naturally became a site of travel and healing for many tribes. American Indians continue to call this area home, and now Chicago is home to the sixth largest urban American Indian community that still practices their heritage, traditions, and care for the land and the waterways. Today, Chicago continues to be a place that calls many people from diverse backgrounds to live and gather. Despite the many changes the city has experienced, our American Indian community sees the importance of the land and this place that has always been a city home to many diverse backgrounds and perspectives. Lastly, it's important for us that these acknowledgments recognize the ongoing present-day global genocides that are the direct result of the same settler colonialism that led to the genocide against this land's indigenous inhabitants. With that, we express our solidarity with the Palestinian people as they fight against the State of Israel with arms and financial aid provided by the United States of America and other Western nations.
Tonight from Chicago, it's Exhibit B with Brittney Rogers, Emily Martin, Bill Ayers, and Octavio Quintanilla. All right, welcome in everybody. My name is Ian Eric Wachkevich. This is Exhibit B for January 2025. Maybe the last Exhibit B for a little while, going on a mini hiatus. As you can see, the photo of my usual co-host, James Stewart III, sits beside me. He actually has a book coming out this year. So he's knee-deep in the book tour stuff, and we'll be sure to provide you with that link when the book comes out, as I'm sure you're all dying to read it. But tonight, we're going to start the year with 4 absolutely incredible readers that we are so happy to host, and we hope that you're happy to listen to. You're going to hear from Octavio Quintanilla, from Emily Martin, from Brittney Rogers, and from the one, the only Bill Ayers talking about his new book as well. But let's get it started. Enough hearing from me. First up tonight is going to be Octavio Quintanilla, who's the author of the poetry collection If I Go Missing from Slough Press in 2014, and the Book of Wounded Sparrows from Texas Review Press in 2024, which has been long listed for the National Book Award. Also, the Impossible Hours winner of the 2024 Ambrosio Prize given by the Academy of American Poets is forthcoming from the University of Arizona Press. Please welcome Octavia.
Hi, my name is Octavio Quintanilla. I am going to be reading a few poems from my most recent poetry collection titled The Book of Wounded Sparrows, published in 2024 by Texas Review Press. Before I read, I want to give you a little bit of context on the book. It's a book comprised of lyric, narrative poetry, with about 25 visual poems that I call frontextos. And a frontexto is just a combination of 2 words, frontera and texto, which basically mean border and text. I am from South Texas, so I think there are some references to place in the book, but also just the sensibility, I think, is connected to this area. The book is overall an exploration of family separation and geographic and emotional dislocation. This book takes you on a journey, and it gives you a glimpse of what it means to be 9 years old and be separated from your parents. Your parents, in my case, my parents stayed in Mexico, and my little brother and I came to live in the United States to attend school, and our siblings and parents stayed behind. So this book, in many ways, has to do with that experience of separation and loss in the sense that once we came over here, a lot of things that we used to do and that made us who we are stayed behind on the other side of the river. For example, the language itself, and our families and our friends and the playgrounds and just everything that made up our life stayed behind. So with that context, I want to read a few poems. This first poem is called Parting. Parting. There was a time I had no word for darkness, and so I said darkness. I had no word to say devotion, and so I said two sons grieving one mother. A time came when our parents sat under a tree and sobbed for us, their sons on their way to a new country. When I try to return to my boyhood, sometimes I end up a grown man with my head on my mother's lap. This next poem is called Loneliness. As a boy, I would climb trees, reach into nests birds would leave unattended. I would fill my hand with small eggs, and often one or two hatchlings would stare at me from behind the sprigs. There were times I wanted to take them home, keep them as my own, raise them. Imagine their beaks one day opening to call me Father. Here's the poem that opens the book. It's called Vanishing Point. In a handwritten letter you appear, offering an answer like fog. I forget the question, but it must have looked like a skinny child abandoned by God. Yes, God. The one with a capital G. The one who squints at us from his great bright heaven and nursed the word abandonment into the monster it is. I am old enough not to test your emotions. I might even be by now nothing more than a casket in my own children's memory. What does it matter? I have made it this far, and still there's nothing that can heal this rift between myself and this boy I have crisscrossed like uncharted territory. I have talked to him, but who knows if he hears what I say, or if he reads what I write. He's always a boy when I summon, and I look down so I can see him, and he looks up so he can see me, and there is nothing to help us touch. This poem is called New God. Yesterday I wanted to buy myself a new God, one who never tires of forgiving me, one who rejoices when I turn my back on him. Half asleep, I imagine I hammer the cross of the ocean with the nails of my footsteps. Yes, I walk on water, and in the distance I make out the light of your station. Here we meet underneath the North Star, and I tell you I want to buy a new God, one with the courage to break my fate in two, one whose hand will guide mine to your heart, so the history of all your loves can be revealed. Yesterday, as I invented a new God, I thought of all the years I claimed I would surrender not to be here, contemplated all the goodness I have lost. This poem is called Love of My Life. Tonight, you are not my lover. Tonight, I am not your husband. How hard can it be to enter my bed as my mother? I'm a newborn, feed me. I'm the abandoned lamb, the weak hatchling, the branch broken in two to beat a spoiled child. I am all memory. Be a mother and sing me to sleep. Baby, talk into my heart's ear. Run your hand over my head. You, milk at the corner of my mouth.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you again to Octavio for being part of the show. Really awesome to see that practice. We're going to drop a few links in the chat. If you could go check them out if you want to see more of Octavio's work. And next up, we're going to have an old friend of the show, Emily Martin, reading next. Emily is a writer and teacher from Brooklyn. She's most recently the author of My Salvation Lateral, From the Elephants in 2024, and Marking the Salt Ridge in 2023. More of her work can be found at myemilymartin.com. Again, we'll drop that link in the chat for you. But otherwise, Emily, take it away.
Hello, I'm Emily. Thank you so much, everyone here tonight. Thank you, Exhibit B, for organizing and for having me, and for everything that you do. I'm going to read from my new book, My Salvation Lateral, published by The Elephants in the Fall. They're a great press. Check them out. And then I will read some new work. So thank you so much for listening. Inhabitants of a mangled shape crawl into something really quite personal, a clear rock puddle washed by waves, and your own hesitation to bear the exposure. But also I want to gather it all up into my hands and say, this is it. I need you to see it, I said to myself, that the impulse was real and I was right, to close without saving even a little alone of character and brilliant parts, as if that would stay her dissatisfaction when faced with a chance to produce herself lyrically and left teaching from emptiness. Induce nothing. First, hours of rushing shade. Long ourselves and are patient, for then you became a great gift. Not beautiful, but cute. Hate work, but will come back after pause or mistake, where the shame of discontinuity offers yourself up for judgment. Evil betide me if I do not cross the threshold every day and enter a space that is not a space, but commitment to tending the ceaseless generation, to point to bright flapping the scree-bed of sky, the shape of absolution that does not exist, but in tiny and delicate writhings. They meet on her outfit, unsown and unpastured. The cull was debated. The minister still plans to kill all the mink in the field. Need to strengthen my muscles, my rigor with bits that turn toward, though technological death has a less embarrassing pull. And sometimes hanging out in a group can be scary, especially when you don't have a common project. What becomes the project when you don't have one already? In the park, in a circle, talk of music and work, stories vibrate my throat to the stars and I meet them in bed later. Strung out and organized on stage, the stones would have little pieces of painted Velcro stuck to them so they could balance strangely and impossibly. The children are still shepherding under the table. The lamb is trapped in glowing marble. The river rocks don't shine at night, but when there's no night, when it's only the brightness of day and they're always underwater. And impossibly the children turn the ring to the east. The children turn the ring. To the east turns the chorus, turns the ring to the sun, turns the chorus to the hunters. To the sun hunters turn, for and trembling, to take part in the general hunt. Those who use violence to prevent the alleviation of suffering. Those who require sacrificial masses and explain eternal hunger in a stage whisper split the sun in two and manufacture scarcity from excess. It's not necessary. But he says it, and it is so. And it is. In the bright glass case between impulse and act, a silent scream tells the secrets of the future in the language of sandpipers. I know nothing of mining, nothing of cliff faces or their brutalization, just to hesitate the brambles under two suns, lift our throats and spread our work jelly of milk made clear in permanent days excarnation by birdsong. I sat in the theater and watched the defleshing of the dead. Brightness spilled out from cut marks suggests romance? It's between you and yourself, Emily. Please help quickly. Protect your drawings, for they are pictures of drenching waves. I wanted more and more. I wanted to linger and stroll out. I wanted to keep myself occupied. I needed to look in my pockets for an unexpected guest, a tiny piece of algae crawling from the sea. I needed to make eye contact with someone I didn't know, across the room, across a table. I don't know where you're looking because I don't know where I sit on your screen and I'm only looking at myself. Veins glaring in gold, will you watch from a distance as I act like you're not there? Tacitly treating each other as owners of our things and therefore independent. In the wide bright, in the sky bright, mangled sleeps transform to work on variant time, to sit and stare at the light that climbs up through the earth and out from the tiles. The work jelly spills milk-made exposure to live, as if on a spit. I wander through trees of streaks that leave no shade, and I lie on the beach as the day turns to evening but brings no relief, for the sun's never set, and the night is inescapable as noon. These are our partisan forests, inscribed on an uncertain object, exquisitely tuned to historical forces, this version of my truth. So what can I do with this tool I've created? This guileless idiocy revels in that which I wrote to discover, whose retribution, they say, is worth $24,000. Raise your glasses. Drink to our hostless, crying a song that is touching. Maria, I'm drunk. I fear the black milk of morning. Historical fact. Oh, we drink you divisive, unfragmented anti-imperialisms don't work as sentences still. Rung-speaking path. Revolt of the meat, give me accuracy. Tellings for thousands and thousands of names. To learn all they did and played, suffered and labored, as if you had been present, or heard it from someone who was. Into the wax of the whole world verging, press everything happening, and save it all in a totally new image folder. But what can I do with all this anger? It is unbearable. What words speak to life? What does not wrap in poetry is become rupture. I keep telling myself two things. One, it is an honor to feel this. And two, the safety of empire is not safe at all, and the entrance of history into God is the shattering of empire's safety net, the disillusion. One thing to do with anger is take risks with your friends, or people who aren't your friends yet but could be. We won't get bored. I began with the customary greeting. Yes, I believe that language holds a violent sacrificial potential, but I do not believe it's more threatening in the immediate sense than the actual violence of war. What is at stake in the fact that something like art or literature should exist? That this is both what I find myself doing and fight for the days to delight in ribbons of useless decisions, rooms with painted ceilings, the loveliness of life that gets wrapped in poetry, but the realities of war never. For the poets recognize barbarism immediately and without equivocation. What flashes up at a moment of danger, as in the dusk, beneath the new moon, men look at each other. My fear is that they all talk about me behind my back, say I'm strange and prudish, and though the wretched voice told me that once, it came not from men, but from a young girl in a hallway, and what concerns me now is her wretched voice's will to extermination. Turn around. What are you doing? You think you're a part of something bigger than yourself? The drama? Your incessant being there only divides what binds everyone else. You keep trying to claw at the joke they all know and won't tell you, but Tulip, I'll tell you, they wish you were dead. Distance. Go sit by yourself or go read something else. Make no mark, indentation, engraved representations appear as collections of dead words when they have nothing to do with the concrete conflict in which the people engage. Inscribed on the cup is the voice of the cup. In response to the children who issue the statement, we come now to shout and invite you to protect us. The wretched voice says, let them watch. I did not write for months. When I started to try, I got extremely cold. I could not stop shaking, even after I wrapped myself in heating pads and blankets. I took the coldness to mean I was saying something true. I saw the coldness as a giant pit of ash inside me that was churned by circular blades. This felt somehow like a connection to history. I watched and I saw the burnt skeleton of the same boy from the press conference. This is barbaric, the language or image of after. Still, today is June 11th, 2024, and I'm writing to keep the pit of death open inside me, for surely as house, flower, fruit tree would I be moved to violence. Then I turned round completely and I faced my poets. Never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are. Rage, sing, biblically accurate etymological angel. There is a man in the house and he cleaves his snakes. He cleaves his snakes from the spur to revolt of the meat of the world and its loveliness. Pillars descend in long, innumerable avenues. Yes, there was all this material, and then there was a working through the material, as if plowing through dirt in a marble courtyard. Yes, it was architectural too, precisely. There was the section drawing at eye level and the plan view above, and the plan spilled down into the section. But here is another thing. In her novel, the violence is represented as random and therefore existential, when really it is consequential and material. I have learned that genocide is common, often happens at the same time as war, and is comprised of crimes that can be proved. It is not mythical. It is the logical conclusion when any desperate and exclusionary group of people is allowed to do anything. A precipice lies under the earth. I don't mean the structure of hell, or Las Vegas, or Ash, but a ladder of writing that comes from the ceaseless generation. What can I make when something like literature should exist and is made of language? Inscribed on the cup is the voice of the cup, where icebirds for kingfishers prompt, correspond, render helpless in axlight the same sound, the same filled up with wings. Rung speaker, who is my name, who could bloody the whole house? Did you write anything down about how cold you got? In the ghetto nuovo, the old clamshells rattle and sing of mutation. In dirt inscribes what? Legible as movement. Did you write anything down about how cold is the feeling of death come inside now to sing of material spurs onto violence that's neither random nor existential and bring them at once through the tossed branch summoning what? Video, uselessness, silvery wrapping, and there is a light and it never goes out. The food is ready, the air is silver, the garden is painted. Look at your drawing, cut like you draw the line. Today is December 19th, 2024, and everybody can see the US executives call any violence they don't profit from terrorism, while we style the strife of glory to the purpose of those that do it. To die by your side, well, the pleasure, the privilege is mine. Inside the wild house praying right now, as we verge, we convolve with the dirt. To inscribe in what image, in what concave folder. I've learned how to strengthen my muscles. Now I must sharpen my bones. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again to Emily Martin. Like I said, we'll be popping the website in the chat. Go check out Emily's work. We've known Emily since the grad school days, and the work has been incredible since then. So please, go check it out. Next up today is going to be something a little different than we usually do. We bring a lot of readers, which our next guest is one of those, but this is a little bit more of an interview that me and Jim did with Bill Ayers rather than just a straight reading. We had some questions we wanted to ask Bill, and he was more than gracious enough to sit down with us and answer those questions. Today we're going to be talking about Bill's latest book, When Freedom is the Question, Abolition is the Answer, Reflections on Collective Liberation, which Beacon Press put out. And in case anybody doesn't know, a little intro for Bill Ayers. Bill is a distinguished professor of education and senior university scholar at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Retired, obviously, is a graduate of the University of Michigan, the Bank Street College of Education, Bennington College, and Teachers College, Columbia University. He's an engaged scholar and peace and social justice activist who has written extensively about social justice and freedom, democracy and education, the cultural contexts of schooling and teaching as an essentially intellectual, ethical, and political enterprise. Me and Jim sat down. It was a long conversation. I think we're going to put the whole thing on our website at some point, but just for time in this environment, we've cut down the interview to 20 minutes. So if there are any intriguing gaps in our conversation, you're wondering what happened then, head on over to Exhibit B's website and check out the whole thing for yourself. But without further ado, please welcome Bill Ayers. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I think the first thing me and Jim were interested in is just the word abolition in the title. Obviously, I know you've talked about before that brings up the image of the abolition of slavery. I know that we use that word a lot more in political discourse now regarding prisons and the abolition of the military-industrial complex, etc. But I just was interested in what you think of when you think of abolition in that modern context.
You know, there are two words in the title. When freedom is the question, abolition is the answer. I'll say a word about abolition and then maybe a word about freedom.
Sure.
Because for me, abolition, you're absolutely right to reference Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and the abolitionist movement of the 1830s, 40s, 50s. Actually, the abolitionist movement started when the first ship of slaves landed in North America. So there's always been an abolitionist movement, but it gained traction and force. And certainly everyone should, if you want to understand the canon of abolition Frederick Douglass is a good place to start, but he's not the beginning. He is one of the most eloquent and brilliant and I think important spokespeople for abolition, not just the abolition of slavery, but abolition as a philosophy, as a concept. Because think of it, Frederick Douglass was born into slavery. He escaped his own imprisonment. He went on to become an unbelievably eloquent and brilliant speaker about slavery and about the sin of slavery. He lived to see Reconstruction, and he lived to see the crushing of Reconstruction. So here was this long life, and I reference him often in regard to what do we do now? Well, what did Frederick Douglass do when Reconstruction was defeated? Did he sit down and go home? No, he got up and continued to another day in the struggle, and that's kind of how I think about this moment. It's another morning, another fresh morning in the broken world. Let's get busy. Let's go to work. But yes, Douglass is a good beginning. Interestingly, Karl Marx, who in the Communist Manifesto, I think he mentions communism half a dozen times. He mentions abolition 20 times. And so abolition is a concept that's bigger than any epic or any person. But if you follow the canon about abolition and you get up more to the modern age, then you are looking at Angela Davis and Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor and Ruth Gilmore and Erica Miners, a Chicagoan, Alice Kim. There's a whole canon about abolition. And I wanted to make a small utterance in that conversation. And for me, abolition is way, way more. The more you dig into it, it's way more than unlocking a gate or undoing some shackles. It really is about imagining a world that could be, but is not yet, a world where slavery is unthinkable, or a world where prisons are unnecessary. What would that world look like? And it seems like it's not only demonized, but it seems like pie in the sky to sit here in 2025 in the immediate aftermath of the election of Donald Trump and to say, well, we want to abolish prisons. But think about it. If you and I were sitting here in 1845 and we were abolitionists and we were having a meeting, and some of us were going to knock on doors and make leaflets, some of us were going to write op-eds, some of us were going to back political candidates, some of us were going to build an underground. All these things were happening, but it's 1845. And because we're abolitionists, our meeting is small. We're against the Constitution, the founders, the president, the law, our preacher, the Bible, our parents, our neighbors. But what the hell? We're abolitionists. But who could have imagined that 20 years later, the institution would be crushed? Wow, what an amazing thing. And so that gives me a lot of hope to try to keep an historical perspective and to recognize that I told you guys that I'm 80 years old. And I often think that's a really long time in the life of a human being. But it's really the blink of an eye in the life of a struggle. It's nothing. I mean, and I've lived all 80 years pretty full throttle. I'm planning to keep going, but the struggle will keep going for sure. And I want to think about abolition as world building, not as erasure, but as construction. And so I'll just say one more thing about the word, and that is that if you think of anything that is oppressive or cruel or unfair or exploitative or dangerous, then what you want to think of in terms of a solution is abolition. You don't want to think of, oh, I've got this cruel, dangerous, predatory situation. I think I'll tweak it. No, you want to get, and that's why abolition to me is a useful politics to organize all your thinking around.
Looking at this historically, zooming out, also brings to mind that this isn't America's first brush with fascism, right? The indigenous people experience fascism, we all continue to experience it, but it is a brand of fascism that I think a lot of people are able to say, oh, this is like what happened in Europe during World War II. that it is not an extension of the American program, right? It is just, I think a lot of white liberals feel like it might be affecting them now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's worth noting. I mean, the way you put it in my mind is perfect because, when we think of things like the Great Depression, there was a song, and I believe it was Leadbelly who wrote a blues tune, and it said, "People talking about hard times. I've never known anything but hard times." So the Great Depression of the 1930s was the entire society, including the privileged and the white, experiencing what was the experience of Black folks in the South always. So the idea
Mhm.
that somehow, ooh, it's remarkably new. No, it's old. And another way of saying the same thing is that I mentioned that the other word in the title is freedom, but it's worth noting that the fundamental American contradiction is that freedom for the conqueror is always misery, murder, and mayhem for the conquered. And that's our story. Our story
Mhm.
fought for freedom, and it included the freedom to own other human beings. It included the freedom to continue the North Atlantic free slave trade. It included the freedom to conquer west of the Appalachian Mountains. In other words, it was framed as freedom, but what does freedom mean? And it's important to keep in mind that freedom, well, two aspects. One is what I said, freedom for the conqueror is always murder for the conquered. But it's also true that social freedom is quite different than individual freedom. Individual freedom to drill wherever I want to build a golf course in a national forest or a police training grounds, and to rip up a beautiful forest in Atlanta, Georgia, to build a
Mhm.
police training ground. That's freedom for some, but it's not freedom for all. And that's why social freedom is so important, that we think about when you think of the word freedom. Every American is for it. I mean, there's the Freedom Caucus in the Congress, the right wing Freedom Caucus. There's the insufferable Ron DeSantis's book, The Courage to Be Free. And then there's my favorite is the Visa card from Chase Bank called Freedom Unlimited. Oh, yeah, that's freedom, kind of. There's also the Black Freedom Movement. There's also the Queer Liberation Movement. There's also the Women's Freedom Movement. I mean, these are all movements, these are all using the word freedom as well. So the subtitle of my book is Reflections on Collective Liberation, because that's
Mhm.
what I'm interested in. Collective liberation includes personal freedom, the right to drink at a drinking fountain or ride on a bus, but it also identifies a public that's being put down or kept down because of some quality, their race, their color, their class, their gender, their sexual preference. And as a public, as that public comes into view, it fights for liberation, which includes personal freedom, but it goes much deeper than that because it includes structural shifts. And that's what I think we should all be working toward.
Hmm. I know that in the book you talk a lot about contradictions and, the nature of humanity is dealing with contradictions, but also, obviously politically, it would seem that both sides, at least rhetorically, would agree that freedom is a good thing. They like to use it. They like to use the word. But yeah, there seems to be a pretty large contradiction in what those people believe freedom to actually represent. And yeah.
I think they're pretty clear, and I think the clearest example that I think we should all be paying attention to, way beyond worrying about Elon Musk's Nazi salute, which is terrible, of course. But there's something much deeper going on, which is there are a group of hyper wealthy ruling class people today who believe that, and this is also not new, Jim, as you said, this is not nothing new, but who believe that we would be best served if we got rid of democracy. And and you and I know, I think your listeners know, that our democracy has always been flawed and partial and aspirational, um, even sometimes not aspirational, but it's always been imperfect and partial. So some of us, I was a member of Students for a Democratic Society. my father, my CEO father, said to me dismissively, "Freedom for freedom, students for a democratic society. We are a democratic society," and we all laughed out loud because we didn't think so, because we thought participatory democracy includes everyone, and the goal is to include more and more and more voices, not less. But there is a group, Elon Musk being one example of it, but there are many, many others who believe in a kind of right-wing libertarianism, which believes that we ought to have a CEO, dictator, ruler who's benign and beneficent, but who rules in our favor, rather than allow the messy, imperfect, crazy uh, swirl of democracy. And I am still a member of Students for Democratic Society, and I'm still a student and I'm still for it. So I never got rid of my membership card. And on the membership card, it says, "We are people of this generation, bred in at least modest comfort, looking uneasily at the world we inherit." That's my stance still. I've always believed that, and I still believe I'm of this generation. I don't buy the whole 60s thing. Yeah, I don't know if, but sometimes I get identified as a person of the 60s. And I try to remind people that nobody looked at their watch on December 31st, 1969 and said, "Oh shit, it's almost over. Let's get high." I mean, we did get high, but it had nothing to do. And it's worth, again, in where we started with the view of history, it's worth remembering that whatever we accomplished, and it was very minimal, but whatever we accomplished in terms of moving the notion of freedom forward in the 1960s and 1968 was built on the 1950s and 40s and 30s, all the way back to the Civil War and Black Reconstruction. And whatever we're living through now, whatever happened in 68 was prelude to what we have to do now, the challenges as well as the hopes and dreams. So I don't believe in decades. I believe we're people of this generation, if we're living and looking forward, which we should be. Nothing more depressing than a 80-year-old who's looking nostalgically at a ship that already left the shore. And I'm not that. I want to I want to look forward, and I want to link arms with all the people of this generation and keep moving.
So when was the moment where you had the shift? I know it was very young for you. This shift that here's what I know, here's the values that I have, that I'm going to work to bring these forward in a real collective way.
Well, let me go back to your point. You're quoting Hampton. Fred Hampton, for those who don't know, was a young, charismatic, brilliant leader of the Chicago Black Panther Party who was killed by the Chicago police and the FBI in a pre-planned conspiracy to murder him. So he said, so you quote him saying, "A theory without action is nonsense or not good, or the best theory is good practice." And I would go the other way as well and say action without thinking is also problematic. So let's keep the dialectic, let's keep the contradiction. We need to think and act and think. But theory that simply sits on a couch and makes predictions or makes statements about the society can't ever learn, because the best theory comes right out of the street. It comes right out of the factory or out of the workplace. So you have to develop your theory by engaging the world. And so I want to keep both the heart, head, the mind, the body all in play. But I think you have to kind of, the reason that we act is partly to change reality, but it's also partly to know reality. You can't know it by reading Marx. I mean, I'm all for reading Marx, but let me also put in a word for study. I think in this period, we need to be more serious about study. And that means reading and thinking and talking together. And I think this period demands of us in a way that has been unfamiliar in some ways. It demands of us that we gather in small groups, that we think and read and talk and study together, as well as act together. So I do think I want to hold up study as a worthwhile enterprise. Parenthetically, speaking about today, I think we spend too much time, progressive people in particular, looking at the sites of power we have no access to: the White House, the medieval auction block called the Congress, Wall Street, the Pentagon, and too little time looking at the sites of power we have absolute access to: the street, the neighborhood, the workplace, the classroom, the house of worship, all of that and more. We have power. And mobilizing that power is actually much more sensible in my mind. If you want to feel powerless, read the New York Times, watch MSNBC, and see what the Congress is doing. I mean, you'll feel like crap at the end of
Mhm.
every. But if you want to feel powerful, do what we did then, which is debate the bastards and see that we actually aren't stupid. That we actually are okay.
And I got you got a last question, Ian, as I know I want to
Go
be
for it if you got
respectful of your
another one.
time.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
I think the last question is I don't know, just kind of general about Chicago.
Hmm.
And you're also a Chicagoan. Uh, what is it about this place that keeps us here, in the depths of winter? And what is it about it that has created so many important figures in these progressive movements?
Um, okay, so what about Chicago? You know, I I am a Chicago file. I would never live anywhere else. I'm not going to Florida. I'm not going west. I'm here. And partly, I think of somebody like Nelson Algren, never a city so real. I mean, Chicago has it all. Every messy, messed up contradiction, what Ta-Nehisi Coates writes about in terms of redlining, in terms of segregation. It has the amazing influx of energy and creativity and brilliance that was the Great Migration. And then it has the 1919 race riot, which wasn't a race riot. It's funny, if you ride along Lakeshore Drive on your bike, which I do all the time, there's a marker to where the young man was drowned that kicked off that riot in 19, and that was Red Summer. There were riots all over the country. But the marker that is there, the little rock marker, and the phrase that's there, I don't think it's from Naperville, but it's from one of the suburban schools, put this marker up. And it says, as Martin Luther King said, a riot is the voice of the oppressed speaking out, or something like that. This was not the voice of the oppressed. This was a riot against Black people. It was a murderous attempt to keep Black people down. And so, people get confused about that history. But okay, 1919 happened. The Great Migration happened after that. Um, Industry, a great industrial hub, this brilliant, history of not only DuSable. DuSable married a native woman and moved to Iowa when she was deported. He moved with her and their children. Um, so, it's got so much richness in history. Every contradiction, race, class, everything is embodied in this city, but also Buddy Guy and the blues. Also, food and expressions of joy, and Nikki Giovanni and Hakeem Adabudi, and we could go on and on with the literary figures, George Saunders. I mean, it's an amazing place. So I often think, I'm struggling because I often think, um, as I write in this particular book, that if you ask me to sum up Chicago, I could go on for pages and days.
Mm.
I still wouldn't get to it. And the reason that's true is because it's too complicated. And I often think of my daughter-in-law, who lived in China for many years, one of my daughters-in-law, and she adheres to the idea that if you spend a week in China, you'll write a book. If you spend a year in China, you'll write an article. If you spend 5 years in China, you're voiceless. There's nothing to say. And I feel that way about Chicago. Too damn complicated to sum up in any simple way. When I want to also be mindful of, Adrian Rich, great poet, essayist, who said, there are three ways to live in a city like Chicago. One is kind of the narcissistic. I love Chicago. I love the opera. I love the music. I love the lakefront. And you kind of take a cab to your gym and to your dinner, and that's the narcissist. And then there's the kind of paranoid. Oh, Chicago, I have to. People say, "Oh, Chicago, do you lock the doors?" Actually, I don't lock my door. I worry more when I go to Naperville. Um, that's where the band live, and with Chicago carjacking. And so the paranoid way of living in Chicago is kind of to triple lock doors, carry your mace with you at all times, don't jog because you might get killed, and so on. But the one that she lands on that I try to live is she says the third way of living in the city is something I have a hard time naming, but I think I'll call it city as lover. And I don't mean a romantic or an idealized love. I mean the love you feel with somebody who was preyed upon and praying, somebody who's damaged and bleeding, and you love them anyway, and you work toward reconciliation, towards revival, towards um, resurrection. So that's Chicago for me.
It's great.
Incredible note
Yeah.
and Bill, thank you so much for making time, and what an incredible description of Chicago. It really is all that.
All right, welcome back in, everyone, and thank you again to Bill Ayers for sitting down with me and Jim. Really, really awesome conversation, and really something that I think me and Jim felt like we really needed at the start of this year. It's been a little stressful, as everyone knows, but Bill's an inspiring person, and it was really, really great to sit down and talk about that new book. We'll put some more links in the chat so you can find it for yourself if you so desire. But tonight, we're going to finish up with Brittney Rogers. Brittney is a poet, visual artist, educator, and lifelong Detroiter. She has work published in the forthcoming in Lit Hub, the Hopkins Review, Scalawag, the Poet Lore, Indiana Review, Four-Way Review, Underbelly, Mississippi Review, Lambda Literary, and so many more. Brittney is a fellow of VONA, the Watering Hole, Poetry Incubator, and the Pink Door Writing Retreat. Brittney is editor-in-chief of Muzzle Magazine and co-host of VS Podcast. She is the author of the poetry collection Good Dress from Tin House last year, a Michigan notable book for 2025. Please welcome Brittney Rogers.
Hi, good people. My name is Brittney Rogers. I'm a poet and artist from Detroit. I'm also an educator, and I'm the author of Good Dress, a collection which came out with Tin House Press October of 2024. And I'm really excited to read some poems to you from that collection, as well as some new poems. So you're gonna hear me try out some new things today. So without further ado, I'm gonna jump straight into it. The first poem that I read for you is a poem called Doing Too Much, and it is a part of a series of odes to something called the Ice Cam. What you need to know about the Ice Cam is that it's the camera that at one point was a part of the Detroit Pistons games, and it was like similar to the Kiss Cam, but instead of urging people to kiss, people would basically hold up their jewelry anytime the camera spun in their direction. And I wrote a series of odes to the Ice Cam because that is just the most Detroit shit I've ever seen. It brings me a lot of joy. And for me, it just reflects like all of the audacity of Detroiters. So I'm gonna start there. Doing Too Much. Ice Cam, Little Caesars Arena, January 2022. Cash Dow so Detroit, she throws herself a Pistons-themed baby shower. Makes a museum of balloons and basketballs and gold, and her fans call her gaudy, tacky. Twitter says a Detroit nigga is just an Alabama nigga with buffs. Rappers gifted our governor a pair, gratitude for the year she dared keep our city from dying. Outsiders didn't call her what they call us for wearing sunglasses in a city where we are the only light. They say ghetto and mean migration. They say Detroit, stand up, and we raise our wrists like shot glasses. Toast to us and our colored minks and our Cartiers. necks swaddled in brick-thick chains. It ain't a flex if he ain't wearing at least two and a Jesus piece, if his watch ain't thick as firewood. What's love if your face isn't encased in a necklace long as spite? There are things worse than extravagance. They all know our names. Okay. That poem again is one of my favorites because the ice cam is one of my favorite things. The next poem I'm gonna read is a poem called Bedside Baptist, which is essentially a term that you use when instead of going to church, you worship at your bedside. Bedside Baptist. When done right, the final ringing run of total praise flings my clay arms so wide the sun could jump straight through. From my laptop, I watch Fantasia put on a concert in her living room. She draws out that last amen, the notes sucked pearl clean, so full my chest grows thick with water lilies. I'm not fit for the Lord's house. Crop top, bonnet, boy shorts, lust drunk, giddy off my own perfume. I last wore a slip when we lived at the church 3 nights a week. Back then, I shamed my mother when I wore jeans, refused the baptismal pool, fell asleep in the back pews in the lap of a girl I was too close to. I don't miss the thin rows of wood, their stiff, frowning faces. At home, I am my own priest. I offer my shrill praise, proud, loud, so rowdy, he runs in to see about me. Mm-hmm. Okay, this next poem is called All the Reasons I Said Yes. A dare, a bet, no money on the line. Never for money, though I should have. Not for what I would call money, but certainly for knowing I would be good enough to get a bill paid, daycare covered, the fridge filled. Because I was mad at the other one. Because didn't answer the phone. Because when I get anxious, all my nerves coil tornado tight. See how fast they spin? We don't get tornadoes in Detroit, at least not yet. In school, we still practice the drill twice a year. Practice. So much practice. I wasn't sure that I would ever make it to you. So one of the things that people know about me is that I love writing about my friends. I love writing about platonic intimacy and tenderness and all of those good things. So I just feel like they aren't talked about enough. So this is a poem featuring my best friend. It's called Throwback Night, Midway Skating Rink. I ignore the kids' slinky arms, the dishes, they daddy. Tonight I rush to the rink with my best friend, her fingers locked into mine. The sun dipped already, but we sweating, edges ribboned under summer's breath. I forget to take pictures, but trust, we fine. Out after dark, awestruck at our own groan. Downtown ain't looked like ours since they landed on Woodward and Mind, hollowed the center to erect a high rise. Joke's on them. Everybody here black and in love, and my don't we know how to reclaim what's ours. We don't beat with it. Look how our thighs obey. Backward, glide, turn, slow wind. The DJ cuts the Cupid shuffle, and even on skates we hustle. Our necks tilted bottles, laughter splashing and messy. Oh, how I mine for this belonging, scythe swinging, searching for my name. So busy hiding from selfish, I had dropped damn near everything that was mine. Okay, I'm gonna pivot from there and I'm gonna read you 2 new poems. Okay, the first one is called Gina Tay. It's about being young and playing in your mama's and auntie's perfumes. Um, Gina Tay, can you believe me and my cousins thought we was doing something? Spraying the perfume our mamas brought us to keep our fingers sticky with fresh hormones off they bottles of white diamonds. We mimicked our mothers, studied our baby faces in the bathroom mirror, spritzed both sides of our necks, first one wrist, then the next, the crease of each thigh, the inside of both ankles. We thought the scent would last all night, that it smelt sweet, grown enough to pull in the bees or boys we had eyes for. It took years to learn the real tricks. Now I take lovers who lay close enough to catch a whiff of citrus, vanilla, velvet, and bergamot. I choose a scent for each season, for morning, for midnight, one that I only spray when I see my favorites, those who I puddle for, who turn me back to girl, to the beginning of myself. Now I wear perfume that blows kiss after kiss, that curls its finger towards you, promises, here, darling, here. The second poem is a little bit of a pivot. It's about my grandmother, whom I lost almost 2 years ago. Grief is a joke. Grief is such a joke because it doesn't feel that way. But I'm going to read this poem for her, which is not only thinking about grief, but also thinking about beauty and adornment and ritual and all those good things. Before the service, that night, the city closed its blinds and left us to fend for ourselves against the harsh snow, the thunder applauding the sky. I imagine my grandmother watching from across that thin veil, fit for a bride, that she's the reason the storm didn't swipe my car off the road on the way to the emergency braid appointment after the first braider lost power in her booth. I had to beg for this slot. Same day, late evening, snow flooding the street. On a different night, I might have tried to tame my own roots. But how could I chance a failed twist out, a poofed out press and curl, my granny girl watching from across the altar as I walked into her funeral unkempt? I couldn't bear to fail her in that way, looking unloved, messing up her good name. I know my granny loved me down, would bend the sky and come back to this earth for me, if only, if only. Okay. And then this is my last poem for you all. It's called Blackout Detroit. It's written about this blackout that happened in 2003. Real ones know. It was like a whole citywide blackout. And the poem itself has an epigraph. It says, it was one of the biggest power outages that the US ever saw. At first, people were worried it was an act of terrorism, but when the blackout was confirmed as merely a power outage, the mood shifted. Michigan Radio Newsroom. The grills turn up. Somebody's speakers serenade all our porches and we jam, smoke-soaked and lawless, all open hormones in this powerless field. What is it about the end of the world makes you think you are owed an explanation? From God? From your mama? From the boy who ghosted months ago when the air became more steam than breeze, his number still memorized and half dialed each evening? You would chase him down, make him answer to you while the streetlights are silent. But this block, this city, don't know how to tell us apart in the daylight, done swallowed whole bodies before this night, ripe for disappearing. First, the man of the house next door swept clean off his mama's porch. Maria, a dandelion blown away from the passenger seat of her new man's custom Cutlass. My city give a fuck about the proper order of things. She love a malfunction, all them downed wires, mirrors broken in the street. Our minivan set on stolen bricks by thieves kind enough to leave the metal skeleton stripped in the driveway. This block, hormone swole, smelling herself. There is no law. Sometimes in May, it snows. Thanks y'all for having me.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you again to Brittney Rogers for being part of the show tonight. And thank you again to all of our contributing artists, Bill Ayers, Emily Martin, Octavio Quintanilla, obviously, who started us off. Really just a wonderful show. For us, I know that we put these shows out, but I want you to know that for all of us here at Exhibit B, it is such a refreshing, such a hopeful practice to see all this art, meet all these people, and talk to them about their practice. It is just, it's invigorating. And so thank you for being here to watch these shows with us. As I said, Exhibit B might be dark for a little bit, but we always got stuff. So check out our website at Exhibit B. And until then, until we see you next time, much love, and we'll see you soon.